Undertaker from either a professional or independent standpoint. He was always involved, he was always there, and it's really upsetting that we're not going to get a chance to see Paul Bearer accept his own Hall of Fame induction, which will probably be accepted now by The Undertaker on his behalf. I think that he's definitely a future Hall of Famer. We'll probably see him as early as 2014 being inducted in the WWE Hall of Fame. He's very deserving of being inducted into the Hall of Fame. If there's anyone who goes in the Hall of Fame prior to The Undertaker, it's definitely Paul Bearer. And I think that if The Undertaker were to go into the Hall of Fame over the next 5 years, if Paul Bearer were still here, Paul Bearer would respectively induct The Undertaker, just as The Undertaker would do the same for him if Paul Bearer goes in over the next few years. I think that, this is just heart-wrenching to see another legend go like this, so early in 2013. If you were to tell me within the first few weeks of 2013 I'd be archiving a video where I'd be talking about the death of Paul Bearer, I would say you're absolutely out of your mind. But here I am talking about it again just 2 years after losing the Macho Man Randy Savage. A death of professional wrestlers is something that always affects people, especially those involved in the business who knew them on a personal level. And from what I understand, a lot of people are very upset over the death of Paul Bearer. There have been tributes on WWE programming over the last couple of days, and there have been a lot of tributes in the way of photos and videos on professional wrestling news websites, and especially on WWE.com. Powerful, powerful stuff. Just the other day on WrestleMania.com, I was checking out WrestleMania updates, and I noticed rare photos of The Undertaker and Paul Bearer had been posted as one of the headlines. And, it brought back a lot of memories, especially from the early 1990s when The Undertaker was really in his prime and Paul Bearer was cutting some of the best promo work I had ever seen. A manager cut since the days of Freddie Blassie. It was unbelievable. Taking a look back at that, and YouTube especially has a lot of Undertaker Paul Bearer moments. Just the other day I watched the betrayal of Paul Bearer and The Undertaker. You might be thinking to yourself, why would you watch the betrayal of two very good friends in the professional wrestling business? The thing about that was, it was one of my favorite Paul Bearer moments because it allowed Paul Bearer to expand on what would become a legendary career as a manager. It allowed him to manage people like Mankind, Vader, and Kane, who had a rivalry with The Undertaker during the Attitude Era. And I think that one thing that Paul Bearer also saw his career do was change drastically, especially when he separated from The Undertaker. We saw Paul Bearer undergo many metamorphoses of his character, and I think during the Attitude Era, this was when Paul Bearer was one of the most infamous heels and doing some of the best work he had ever done in his wrestling career. And when he returned after being gone for over 6 years, it was just awesome seeing him back to reunite with The Undertaker and Kane for one of the most infamous feuds about 3 years ago. It's a feud that's still talked about when Kane was the world champion. It was unbelievable seeing that feud and how Kane managed to get the better of The Undertaker, allowing The Undertaker to return on a yearly basis every year for WrestleMania to defend his prestigious streak. It was believed, and it was in the minds of a lot of wrestling fans, that Paul Bearer would be returning this year for WrestleMania to be at the side of The Undertaker to face CM Punk. And they probably would have went through with that, only now it's not going to be possible. And I would have loved to have seen Paul Bearer at the side of The Undertaker at least for one final time, especially with how rare it is that we see The Undertaker perform inside the WWE ring nowadays. We see him once a year at WrestleMania, and I would have loved to have seen Paul Bearer at the side of The Undertaker, and it's a shame we're not going to get a chance to see that. I don't think there's ever going to be another person like Paul Bearer in the professional wrestling business, no matter who you bring in and who you try to perceive as a manager. It's just extreme rarity now that managers are even talked about in professional wrestling. But when you talk about managers, there are usually 3 to 4 top managers you always bring up in conversation. Jimmy Hart for managing the Hart Foundation, Bret Hart and Jim the Animal Neidhart, Freddie Blassie, the $1 Million Man, Paul Bearer are always names that come up. And I think that if not for these, at least top 5 managers, managers probably would have never been taken as serious as they were, especially in the 80s or 90s. Nowadays, it's an extreme rarity. You hear these managers' names brought up, but when you do, it's always a pleasure to have a 20 to 25-minute discussion with managers. I talked to Ted DiBiase about 4 to 5 years ago, and one thing that he talked to me about was how much of an honor it was for him to work with Paul Bearer. But one thing that he never wanted to do was actually conduct business with him from a professional standpoint outside of the business. And I tried to figure out why Ted DiBiase was saying this, so I posed the question to him, why wouldn't you want to conduct business with him outside of the business? and he alluded to the fact that Paul Bearer was a real-life mortician. Now, I previously knew that Paul Bearer was a real-life mortician, but I didn't know that Paul Bearer was just as intimidating outside of the business as he was to many inside of it. From what I understand, Paul Bearer was an honorable human being, even though he perceived himself sometimes as a jerk. He was a guy that, loved to keep his personal life and his professional career separate, and that's a quality that I think people like the Ultimate Warrior can learn from, because you have so many people in the professional wrestling business who are unable to separate both their personal lives and their professional career, because to a lot of them it's all about the professional wrestling business and the steroids that you're on, the situations you find yourself caught up within, and it's very difficult because of once you find yourself caught up within to separate professional wrestling from a real life perspective. But Paul Bearer took great pride in being able to separate both worlds, and I think that is one reason why sometimes he perceived himself as a jerk. But he did what he had to do, and he achieved a great deal of success for it. And I think that, these video packages we've been seeing for Paul Bearer, along with the dedication of several WWE programs to him, is really honorable. I'm expecting Vintage Collection to drop a full hour of the show towards Paul Bearer as somewhat of a dedication to him, where we'll take a look back at some of the most memorable moments of Paul Bearer's career. And I know our Twitter account has been tweeting a lot of Undertaker and Paul Bearer moments as somewhat of a little tribute that we put together for the life of Paul Bearer, which has seen many memorable moments. If you ever were to comprise a highlight reel of a manager in particularity in professional wrestling, Paul Bearer would have so many highlights in this highlight reel. It will be unbelievable. Just the other day I was on YouTube, and there have been so many videos of Paul Bearer's career uploaded, along with some tributes fans have created, from slideshows to video tributes. It's been unbelievable. Moments that I have even forgotten about from Paul Bearer's career. And usually I don't forget about anything in professional wrestling. There are moments that have been uploaded to YouTube that I can't even recall. So there are some diehard fans out there that are going to miss Paul Bearer, and I believe that if you live your life with the purpose of never being forgotten, Paul Bearer has certainly achieved that, and he'll never be forgotten. When people are 80, these images that Paul Bearer was able to instill in the minds of wrestling fans from both the past era of wrestling and today's era of wrestling will never be forgotten. People will still be talking about the contributions of Paul Bearer, and the night that inevitably will come where he will be inducted into the Hall of Fame will be a piece of footage that we look back at in the WWE.com video archives for many years to come, and be talked about for many years to come as well. I hope they release a DVD and Blu-ray on his career as well, because Paul Bearer did have a lengthy career that can be described as legendary. A legend is described as someone who has been there forever and done everything capable of him to be able to do. And I think that Paul Bearer fits in the criteria of being described as a legend, not just for the clients that he represented, but for his career and his lifetime in general. I venture to say that Paul Bearer will be a bigger legend in death than he ever was during his lifetime. He'll be perceived as Johnny Cash of professional wrestling, in my opinion. Now, there's never going to be another one quite like Paul Bearer. The good thing that comes out of this, and I referenced this in my column, is that now Paul Bearer can join his wife, who passed away 3 to 4 years prior to Paul Bearer, in heaven. So at least there is a little bit of happiness that Paul Bearer can get out of this. Not so much happiness as we probably would like to get out of it, but there is a little bit of happiness and a good side to all of this. At least Paul Bearer can now be reunited with his wife that he spent many years with prior to his death. This kind of thing is never going to cease in professional wrestling. This time next year we're going to be talking about someone else who's passed away. We just don't know who. It's kind of gotten to the point now where it's happening at least 3 to 4 times every year. Either someone who has been around for a considerable amount of time, or someone who is just dying at a young age is leaving the professional wrestling business. It's a problem that's never going to see correction, and it's just going to keep getting worse as the years go by. The death of Paul Bearer brought me back to the 1990s, when this kind of thing would be happening once every 6 to 8 months. Now we're at a point where it's happening once every 3 to 4, and at the end of every year we're up to 3 to 4 more additional deaths on a list that is about 6 to 7 pages. I think in 2006, 2007 we had seen up to over 40 deaths in professional wrestling. It was unbelievable reading the statistics of that, very frightening. And I can only imagine what point we're going to be at by the time we reach the halfway point here of 2013. We're just a few weeks into 2013. There's still a lot of novelty surrounding the year, and we've already seen Paul Bearer at just 59 years of age, who had a considerable amount of time left in his lifetime to accomplish even more than he previously had, and he's gone. Where are we going to be by the halfway point of 2013 early on into 2014? Who's going to be next? It's just a shame. It was once every 6 to 8 months we'd see something like this happen. Now we're seeing it once, every 3 to 4. So it's just a shame that this kind of thing has to happen, and it raises the question, what issues are we really faced with behind closed doors with professional wrestling? Is it, so much the blame of the business or the individuals that this is happening to? The answer to that question remains unknown and will remain unknown for a considerable amount of time before we get to the point of an answer, which we probably never will reach. But it's happening a bit too much, and I think that something really needs to be done. We're seeing it a little bit too much, and is it really the blame on the business or the blame of the person that this is happening to? I think it's really half and half. The business is putting a lot of pressure on people. After the years of contributions, it seems as if they can't even enjoy retirement, and then the people who had been involved in so much controversy throughout their careers are still finding themselves caught up within things from their past, and as a result, they suffer from a death. It's unbelievable how far things are taken in the professional wrestling business, and it's just beyond me why this had to happen to such a credible name. Professional wrestling, if credibility were to be defined, Paul Bearer had more than enough credibility, and he had reached a point of establishment in the professional wrestling business. There are so many videos of Paul Bearer's career, just to put into perspective for today's wrestling fans what he meant to professional wrestling. His contributions were seemingly endless, and he never stopped giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. I worked with a host of a radio show on blogtalkradio.com for several years named Michael Porter. I knew him from both a professional and personal standpoint, and together me and him shared stories about our personal lives time and time again. And stories that he would share with me ranged from stories about John Tinta to Paul Bearer. And one of the people that he talked so admirably about was Paul Bearer. It was almost as if Paul Bearer was one of Michael Porter's greatest idols and friends. Without a doubt, he was one of Michael Porter's greatest friends, and one thing that he would always consistently share with me is a story about either The Undertaker or Paul Bearer. And when Michael Porter passed